The cold wind howled like a vengeful spirit across the desolate plains of West Texas as Finn Hawthorn knelt in the frozen earth, his calloused hands trembling not from the bitter December chill, but from the unbearable weight of the shovel he gripped. His wife's grave would be the 47th dug in Glenrio that winter of 1878, a winter so cruel that old-timers would speak of it in hushed tones for decades to come. "I reckon that's deep enough," whispered Reverend Johnson, his breath forming ghostly clouds that dissipated into the gray sky. The ground's frozen solid 6 inches down. Finn nodded, unable to speak as he stared at the simple pine box containing all that remained of Victoria Hawthorn. His Tory, just 26 years old, and claimed by the same fever that had already taken so many in their small frontier community straddling the Texas-New Mexico border. The ceremony was brief, mercy in the face of the cutting wind that threatened to steal away the Reverend's words of comfort. Finn barely registered the sympathetic hands squeezing his shoulder as one by one. The small gathering of mourners retreated to what warmth they could find, leaving him alone with his grief and the freshly turned soil. "You weren't supposed to leave me," he whispered, his voice rough from days of unshed tears. "Not like this. Not yet. 3 years of marriage, it wasn't nearly enough. They'd been planning for decades together, for children, for growing old watching sunsets from their porch. They'd weathered drought, bandits, and the hardships of frontier life only for a simple fever to tear their future away in less than a week. Night was falling by the time Finn finally stood, his knees cracking from hours spent in silent vigil. The temperature had dropped further, stars appearing like ice crystals in the darkening sky. He placed his hat back on his head, pulled his coat tighter, and with one final glance at Victoria's grave, turned toward home. The small cabin they had built together stood stark against the landscape, chimney cold and dark. No lantern shone in the window, no smoke curled from the stone stack. No one waited inside. Finn pushed open the door and stood in the threshold, staring at the emptiness that had once been filled with her laughter, her warmth. Their home had never felt so vast and hollow. On the table sat Victoria's half-finished embroidery, a delicate pattern of spring wildflowers she'd been creating as a Christmas gift for Mrs. Dunham next door. Finn reached out, his fingers hovering over the colorful threads before pulling back as if burned. He couldn't touch it, couldn't move it. It was the last thing her hands had created. Instead, he crossed to the cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. Tonight seemed as medicinal a need as any. The amber liquid burned down his throat, offering momentary warmth but no comfort. Nothing could ease the yawning chasm that had opened in his chest. "I don't know how to do this without you, Tori," he whispered to the empty room. Sleep came in fitful bursts, nightmares jolting him awake until he gave up altogether and sat in her rocking chair until dawn broke over the eastern plains. With the first gray light, he made a decision. He couldn't stay in this cabin, surrounded by reminders. He would work until exhaustion claimed him, until the physical pain outweighed the ache in his heart. For the next 5 months, Finn Hawthorn became a ghost of his former self. He took on the most dangerous cattle runs, volunteered for the riskiest jobs at neighboring ranches. He rarely spoke unless necessary, ate only enough to keep working, and avoided town whenever possible. The pitying glances were more than he could bear. "You're running yourself into the ground, son," Buck Randall, owner of the largest spread near Glenrio, told him one evening in late April after watching Finn break 3 wild mustangs in a single day, narrowly avoiding serious injury with each mount. "Victoria wouldn't want this." "Don't matter what she'd want," Finn replied, his voice flat as he tightened the cinch on his saddle. "She ain't here. Buck sighed heavily. My offer stands. The line shack up by Wilson Creek needs a permanent hand. You'd have your privacy but wouldn't be so damned alone all the time. Think about it. Finn merely nodded, mounted his horse and rode off into the gathering dusk. But the old rancher's words followed him home, echoing in his mind as he approached his cabin, now neglected and weather-beaten. The garden Victoria had tended so carefully was overrun with weeds, her flowers choked beneath the invasion. Something inside him cracked at the sight. She would have hated seeing her beloved garden in such a state. For the first time since the funeral, Finn felt something other than the dull throb of grief-shame. He'd dishonored her memory by letting everything they'd built together fall to ruin. The following morning, instead of riding out to find work, Finn stayed home. He pulled weeds until his hands bled, tilled soil gone hard from neglect, and by sunset had cleared half the small plot. It wasn't much, but it was something. A start. Over the following weeks, a subtle shift occurred. Finn repaired the loose boards on the porch steps. He patched a leak in the roof. He began cooking actual meals instead of surviving on jerky and hardtack. None of it eased his grief, but the methodical tasks gave his days purpose beyond mere survival. By early May, the wildflowers Victoria had so loved began to bloom across the plains surrounding Glenrio. Purple and yellow blooms dotted the landscape, bringing color to a world that had seemed relentlessly gray to Finn for months. He found himself stopping his work occasionally, watching the way the breeze rippled through the grass and flowers, remembering how she would gather bouquets to brighten their table. One evening, after returning from town with supplies, Finn found Buck Randall waiting on his porch. "Got a situation," the rancher said without preamble. "Stage was robbed about 20 miles east. Driver killed, passengers scattered. Search party found most of them, but there's a young woman still missing. Sheriff's organizing men to continue looking at first light." Finn nodded. "I'll saddle up." "Figured you would. Meet at the livery at dawn." The search party consisted of 12 men, dividing into pairs to cover more ground. Finn rode with young Thomas Wilkins, a shopkeeper's son who talked enough for both of them, which suited Finn fine. They headed northeast, following a dry creek bed that provided the only natural cover in an otherwise exposed landscape. By mid-morning, the spring sun beat down with unexpected ferocity. They'd found nothing but coyote tracks and the occasional remains of small game. Finn was about to suggest they change direction when Thomas called out, pointing to a flash of color among the rocks ahead. "There. Something blue." They approached cautiously, Finn with his rifle ready. As they drew closer, he saw it was fabric, a woman's skirt, caught on the scrub brush. Beyond it, tucked into the shadow of an overhanging rock, lay a still form. "Miss," Thomas called. "Madam, are you hurt?" The figure stirred slightly. Finn dismounted swiftly, handing his reins to Thomas as he approached on foot. A young woman lay there, her dark hair tangled around a face smudged with dirt and what looked like dried blood from a cut on her forehead. Her traveling dress was torn at the hem, one boot missing entirely. "Madam," Finn knelt beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer skies. For an instant, disorientation clouded her features before fear replaced it. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the rock. "It's all right," Finn said, keeping his voice low and calm, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "We're with the search party from Glenrio. The sheriff sent us." Her gaze darted between Finn and Thomas, who remained mounted a respectful distance away. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "Water," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn uncorked his canteen and offered it to her. She took it with shaking hands, drinking deeply before returning it. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. I was certain no one would find me out here." "What's your name, madam?" Finn asked. Violet Blackburn." "I'm Finn Hawthorn, that's Thomas Wilkins." He gestured toward the younger man. "Are you injured? Besides that cut on your head," she touched the dried blood gingerly. "My ankle. I think I sprained it when I ran from the road." Finn nodded. "We need to get you back to town. Doc Simmons can take a look at you." He stood, extending his hand. "Can you ride?" With his assistance, Violet managed to stand, though she winced when putting weight on her left foot. Finn helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. He could feel how she stiffened at the contact, but there was no help for it. She was in no condition to ride alone, and they were a good 2 hours from town. "My things," she said suddenly. "I had a carpetbag. It's all I have left." "The men who robbed the stage took everything," Thomas said gently. "Sheriff found the bags emptied about a mile from where the driver was shot." Violet's shoulders slumped, and Finn felt a surprising surge of protectiveness. He recognized the expression on her face, the look of someone who had just lost everything. "We'll get you sorted," he found himself saying. "Glenrio takes care of its own." "I'm not from Glenrio," she replied, her voice small. "I'm not from anywhere anymore." The ride back was largely silent. Finn was acutely aware of the woman sharing his saddle, the first he'd been this close to since Victoria. Her scent was different lavender rather than Victoria's preference for rose water, but the simple presence of a woman so near sent a confusing jumble of emotions through him. Guilt, longing, more guilt. By the time they reached town, word had spread that one of the missing passengers had been found. A small crowd gathered outside the doctor's house as Finn helped Violet down from the horse. Sheriff Davis pushed through, tipping his hat to the exhausted woman. "Miss Blackburn, I presume? Glad to see you alive." Rest of your traveling companions made it to safety, though most moved on with the next stage yesterday. "They didn't wait?" she asked, surprise evident in her tone. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Stage lines on a schedule, madam. Most folks couldn't afford to delay." "But you're safe now, and that's what matters." Doc Simmons appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. "Bring her in, Finn. Let's have a look at those injuries." Finn helped Violet inside, settling her on the examination table before stepping back. "I'll leave you to it then." "Wait," Violet called as he turned to go. Her blue eyes caught his, vulnerability clear in their depths. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorn, for finding me." Finn nodded awkwardly. "Just doing what needed doing, madam." He retreated quickly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Outside, Buck Randall waited, leaning against a hitching post. "She going to be all right?" the rancher asked. "Seems so. Sprained ankle, cut on her head, nothing serious." Buck studied him for a moment. "Sheriff says she was headed to Santa Fe, lost everything in the robbery." "No money, no belongings." Finn shrugged. "Not my concern." "Could be," Buck replied. "Mrs. Randall suggested she might need a place to stay while she recovers. Town's talking about taking up a collection to help her get back on her feet." "That's mighty charitable." Buck's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Sarah thought maybe you could use the company, that big empty cabin of yours." Finn's jaw tightened. "No." "Now, Finn, I said no." Finn's voice was sharp enough to draw looks from passers-by. He lowered his tone. "I appreciate the thought, Buck, but I'm not looking for a boarder. Especially not some city woman who's likely never cooked over an open flame or fetched her own water." Buck raised his hands in surrender. "Just a thought. No need to bite my head off." Finn exhaled slowly. "Sorry, just find her somewhere else to stay." He mounted his horse and rode home, trying to ignore the lingering scent of lavender that clung to his shirt. By the time he reached his cabin, he'd managed to push thoughts of the stranded woman from his mind. He had work to do, fences to mend, horses to train, his own concerns to manage. Whatever happened to Violet Blackburn was none of his business. 2 days passed. Finn kept himself busy, rising before dawn and working until he was too exhausted to do anything but fall into bed. He avoided town, sending Thomas to fetch the supplies he needed, paying the young man with fresh eggs from his small flock of chickens. On the third morning, he was repairing his barn door when the sound of an approaching wagon caught his attention. He straightened, squinting against the bright May sunshine to see Buck's wagon coming up the rutted path to his cabin. Buck wasn't alone. Beside him on the wagon seat sat Violet Blackburn, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a borrowed bonnet. As they drew closer, Finn could see she wore a simple calico dress that he recognized as belonging to Mrs. Randall. A surge of irritation rose in him as he set down his tools and walked to meet them. Buck halted the wagon, his expression a mixture of determination and apology. "Finn," he greeted, nodding once. "What's this about Buck?" Finn asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "Now, don't get riled up before you hear me out. I believe I made myself clear in town." Violet shifted uncomfortably on the seat, her cheeks flushing. "Mr. Hawthorn, I told Mr. Randall this wasn't necessary. I don't wish to impose." "You're not imposing, Miss Blackburn," Buck cut in. "And Finn here is a decent man beneath that prickly exterior." He turned his attention back to Finn. Situations changed. Town council decided they could only afford to get her as far as Tucumcari. Stagecoach won't be through for another week, and Mrs. Peterson can't keep her at the boarding house that long without payment. "So you decided I'd take her in?" Finn's voice was cold. Buck's patience visibly thinned. "I decided to ask if you'd consider helping a woman in need, yes. You've got the space, and Miss Blackburn here has offered to earn her keep. She can cook, clean, tend your garden, which, if you hadn't noticed, is still half wild despite your efforts." Finn looked at Violet, who sat with her spine straight despite the clear discomfort on her face. There was something in her expression, a mixture of pride and desperation that stirred an unwelcome memory. Victoria had worn the same look when they'd first met, a young woman alone on the frontier, determined to survive despite the odds stacked against her. "Please," Violet said quietly. "I would not ask this of a stranger, but I have nowhere else to go. I promise I won't be a burden. I'll work hard, and I'll be gone as soon as the stage comes through." Finn ran a hand over his beard, conflicted. The thought of someone else in his and Victoria's home felt wrong, like a betrayal. But the alternative was to turn away a woman with nowhere to go, something he knew Victoria would never have allowed. "1 week," he finally said. "Until the stage comes. You'll sleep in the main room, I'll take the barn." Relief washed over Violet's face. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorn." "I'm deeply grateful." Buck looked immensely satisfied. "Knew you'd do the right thing." He climbed down from the wagon and helped Violet descend, careful of her still tender ankle. "I've brought some of Sarah's preserves and a sack of flour to add to your stores." Miss Blackburn's borrowed a few essentials from the ladies in town, until she can get on her feet. Finn merely nodded, already regretting his decision as he watched Buck unload a small trunk and 2 cloth-wrapped bundles from the wagon. Once everything was settled on the porch, Buck tipped his hat to Violet. "You send word if you need anything, Miss Blackburn. Finn knows where to find us." After Buck departed, an awkward silence fell between Finn and his unexpected guest. Violet stood uncertainly on the porch, her weight favoring her good ankle, eyes taking in the small cabin and surrounding yard. "It's lovely here," she offered. "You have a beautiful piece of land." "It serves," Finn replied shortly. He picked up her trunk. "I'll show you inside." The cabin was simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, table, chairs, and a small sitting area, plus a separate bedroom. It was tidy enough, though hardly welcoming. Finn was acutely aware of the Spartan nature of his current existence as he set her trunk down near the fireplace. "Kitchen's basic but functional," he said, gesturing to the small cooking area. "Pumps out back for water. Outhouse is about 30 paces behind the barn. I keep chickens, so there's eggs. Garden's starting to produce some, and there's usually game if you know how to cook it." Violet nodded, taking it all in. "I can manage. I grew up on a small farm in Missouri before." She trailed off, then cleared her throat. "Before I married, I'm no stranger to country living." Finn felt a flicker of curiosity about her history but suppressed it. The less he knew about her, the easier it would be when she left. "I work from sunup to sundown most days," he continued. "Won't be around much except for meals, and even then I often eat in the fields or at the barn." "I understand. I'll keep to myself and ensure everything is in order." She hesitated. "Mr. Hawthorn, I want to thank you again. I know this arrangement wasn't your idea." "No," he agreed bluntly. "It wasn't." Her face fell slightly, but she nodded. "I'll try to make this as painless as possible for both of us." Finn felt a twinge of remorse for his curtness. It wasn't her fault she'd been robbed and stranded. It wasn't her fault that her presence in his home stirred memories he'd been trying desperately to suppress. "I'll bring your things in," he said, his tone marginally softer. "Then I need to get back to the barn. Make yourself at home. Food's in the pantry if you're hungry." The rest of the day passed in a strange dance of avoidance. Finn stayed outside working, coming in only briefly for water or tools. Violet remained indoors, and through the windows he occasionally glimpsed her moving about, her limp less pronounced than it had been in town. By evening, when he finally came in for the night, he was greeted by the aroma of cooking that stopped him in his tracks. The cabin was transformed not dramatically, but in subtle ways. The floors had been swept, surfaces dusted. The table was set with his mismatched dishes, and a pot of something savory simmered over the fire. Violet stood at the small counter, slicing bread she had clearly baked that afternoon. She looked up when he entered, a tentative smile on her face. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I found some venison in the cold storage and made stew, and there was enough flour to bake bread." Finn stared at the domestic scene, struck by how long it had been since the cabin had felt like a home rather than simply a place to sleep. The ache in his chest intensified. "You didn't need to cook," he said, voice rougher than he intended. "I wanted to earn my keep." She set the bread on the table. "Please sit. You must be hungry after working all day." Awkwardly, Finn took his usual seat. Violet served the stew and sat across from him, her movements graceful despite her injury. For a moment neither spoke, the only sound the clink of spoons against bowls. "This is good," Finn admitted after several bites. The stew was rich and flavorful, the bread warm and surprisingly light. "Thank you." Violet smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her features. "I've always enjoyed cooking. My mother taught me from a young age." "Where in Missouri did you say you were from?" The question slipped out before Finn could stop it. "A small town called Elmwood, near Springfield." She paused. "It's gone now. Most of it burned during the war." Finn nodded, understanding. Many small towns hadn't survived the conflict that had torn the nation apart 15 years earlier. "And you were heading to Santa Fe?" he asked, surprising himself again with his curiosity. Violet's expression clouded slightly. "Yes, I have a cousin there. After my husband died last year, there wasn't much keeping me in St. Louis. I'm sorry for your loss." The words felt inadequate, especially coming from him, but they were sincere. "As am I for yours," she replied softly. At his startled look, she added, "Mrs. Randall mentioned you were a widower." "Recently?" Finn set down his spoon, appetite suddenly diminished. 5 months ago, winter fever. It's a difficult road, isn't it? Violet's voice held no pity, only understanding. The after. Finn nodded, unable to speak. For the first time since Victoria's death, he was talking to someone who truly understood the hollowness, the disorientation of grief. Does it get easier? He found himself asking, immediately regretting the vulnerability. Violet considered his question carefully. Not easier exactly. Different. Some days I can remember James with fondness rather than pain. Other days. She shook her head, but we go on. What choice do we have? They finished the meal in silence, but it was less uncomfortable than before. When they'd done, Finn rose to his feet. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Made up a bed in the loft. You don't have to do that, Violet protested. I'm happy to take the barn. Wouldn't be proper, Finn said firmly. And your ankle's still healing. You take the house. Before she could argue further, he collected a few items he would need and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. Thank you for the meal. Her smile was gentle. You're welcome, Mr. Hawthorn. Finn, he corrected, surprising himself. Just Finn is fine. That night, lying on a makeshift bed of blankets in the loft, Finn stared at the barn roof and tried to make sense of the tumult in his mind. For months, he'd existed in a fog of grief, going through motions without truly living. Now, with a stranger in his home, he felt oddly awake, aware in a way he hadn't been since Victoria's death. It wasn't right. It felt like betrayal. And yet, the simple act of sharing a meal, of speaking to someone who understood his loss, it had cracked something open inside him, letting in a sliver of light where before there had been only darkness. Sleep eluded him for hours as he wrestled with his conflicting emotions. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were a confused jumble of Victoria's face, Violet's understanding eyes, and the vast, empty plains of winter. The following days established a tentative rhythm. Finn would rise early, tend to the horses and other chores, then come in to find breakfast waiting. They would exchange brief conversation before he headed out for the day's work. In the evenings, he'd return to find the cabin tidy, dinner prepared, and Violet working on some mending or other domestic task. Despite his initial resistance, Finn found himself growing accustomed to her presence. Violet was quiet but not withdrawn, offering conversation without demanding it, giving him space while ensuring his basic needs were met. She was nothing like Victoria, where his wife had been vivacious and quick to laugh. Violet was thoughtful and serene, yet there was something equally compelling about her calm presence. On the 4th day of her stay, Finn returned from checking his fence line to find Violet in the garden, her skirts gathered up as she weeded between the rows of young vegetables. Her dark hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, wisps escaping to frame her face as she worked. She hadn't heard his approach, and for a moment he simply watched her, struck by how natural she looked tending the plot Victoria had loved so dearly. "You don't need to do that," he said, finally announcing his presence. "Your ankle." Violet looked up, smiling as she brushed a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "It's much better. Hardly hurts at all now, and I wanted to help with the garden. It's coming along beautifully." Finn moved closer, surveying her work. The weeds had been meticulously removed, the soil around the tender plants loosened. "Victoria loved this garden," he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. "She'd plant flowers among the vegetables, said it made the work of weeding more pleasant to have something pretty to look at." Violet's expression softened. "She sounds like a wise woman. Beauty makes most hardships more bearable." She gestured to the far corner of the plot. "I found some wildflower seedlings coming up by the creek this morning. I transplanted a few here. I hope that was all right." Finn followed her gaze to where several small green shoots had binn carefully moved to the garden's edge. Something about the gesture, this stranger honoring Victoria's tradition, created a lump in his throat he couldn't swallow past. "It's fine," he managed. "She would have liked that." Violet studied his face for a moment, then tactfully changed the subject. "I was thinking of making rabbit stew tonight. I found your snares when I was gathering water. There were 2 caught this morning." Finn nodded, grateful for the shift. "I'll clean them for you. No need. I already did. They're ready in the cold storage." At his surprised look, she smiled. "Farm girl, remember, I know my way around game." That evening, as they ate the promised stew, Finn found himself more willing to engage in conversation. He asked about her journey west, and Violet spoke of the stagecoach route, the people she'd met, the changing landscape. "I'd never seen country so vast," she admitted. "In Missouri there are always trees, hills, something to break the horizon. Out here." She gestured vaguely. "It's endless. Terrifying and beautiful all at once." "It grows on you," Finn said. "The openness. After a while, trees start to feel confining." "Is that why you came west? For the open spaces?" Finn considered the question. "Partly. Mostly it was opportunity. Land was cheap after the war. A man could make something of himself out here if he was willing to work hard enough." "And you met your wife here?" Violet asked carefully. Finn nodded. "Victoria came out as a schoolteacher in '75. Town hired her to teach the children at the new schoolhouse. We married 6 months after she arrived." "Was it difficult for her? Adjusting to frontier life?" A small smile touched Finn's lips at the memory. "She took to it like she was born to it, never complained, even when the roof leaked or the well ran dry. She had this way of making even the hardest times seem like an adventure." Violet smiled. "She sounds remarkable." She was. The familiar ache intensified, but alongside it was something new, a bittersweet pleasure in speaking of Victoria, in sharing her memory with someone else. "And your husband?" Finn asked, surprising himself with his interest. "What was he like?" A shadow passed over Violet's features. "James was complicated. A good man at heart, but troubled. The war affected him deeply. He fought for the Union, was captured at Vicksburg, after the prison camps." She trailed off, then shook her head slightly. "He had demons he couldn't shake. Drink became his escape." "I'm sorry," Finn said, understanding in his tone. Violet nodded. "His heart gave out last winter. Doctor said it was weakened by his time in the camps, but I sometimes think it was simply too heavy with all he'd seen and done." She looked up, meeting Finn's gaze. "We had good times too, though, before the drinking got bad. He could be charming, gentle even. And he loved music, could play the fiddle like an angel." They talked well into the evening, sharing memories both painful and precious. It was the longest conversation Finn had engaged in for months, and though it left him emotionally drained, there was also an unexpected lightness to his spirit as he headed to the barn for the night. The next morning brought rain, steady and soaking, a blessing for the parched land but an impediment to Finn's planned work. He found himself at loose ends, confined to the barn where he could only accomplish so much mending tack and sorting tools. By mid-morning, restlessness drove him back to the house. He found Violet at the table, mending one of his shirts, a small fire crackling in the hearth against the rain-driven chill. "I thought you might like these," she said when he entered, indicating a plate of biscuits and a pot of coffee on the table. "Rainy days always make me crave something warm." Finn accepted the offering with a nod of thanks and settled into a chair across from her. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, Finn drinking his coffee while Violet continued her neat stitches. "You don't have to mend my things," he said eventually. Violet glanced up, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I don't mind. And frankly, your shirts need it." This one had 3 tiers and was missing 2 buttons. Finn found himself almost smiling. Never was much good with a needle. Victoria didn't sew. She did. He trailed off, the almost smile fading. "After she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch her sewing basket." Understanding dawned in Violet's eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry. I found it in the cupboard and assumed." She set down the shirt. "I should have asked." "No," Finn said quickly. "It's all right. They're just things. They should be used." He paused. She would have hated seeing them gathering dust. Violet nodded, picking up her work again. "The first month after James died, I couldn't bring myself to move anything in our rooms. I kept his shaving mug by the basin, his boots by the door, as if he might walk in and need them." Her needle moved steadily, precisely. "My sister finally came and packed it all away while I was at church. I was furious with her at first, but later I understood it was a kindness. Some steps are too hard to take alone." Finn watched her hands as they worked, steady and sure. "Does it ever stop hurting?" It was the second time he'd asked her a variation of this question, he realized. As if she possessed some secret knowledge about navigating grief that he hadn't discovered yet, Violet's hand stilled as she considered her answer. "The sharpness fades," she said finally. "It becomes background instead of foreground. There are days when I realize I haven't actively grieved since waking, and the guilt from that realization hurts almost as much as the original loss." Her words resonated deeply within Finn. He'd experienced exactly that, moments of normalcy followed by crushing guilt that he could function at all when Victoria was gone. "I keep thinking I should have done more," he confessed. "The fever came on so suddenly. By the time I got her to the doctor." "There's nothing worse than feeling helpless while someone you love suffers," Violet said softly. "With James, it was years of slow decline. I tried everything: doctors, treatments, even a temperance society. Nothing worked." She tied off a thread and bit it neatly. "I've come to believe that some outcomes are fixed regardless of our efforts, but that doesn't ease the guilt." "No," Finn agreed. "It doesn't." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence than before, contemplative rather than awkward, shared rather than divided. The rain continued to fall, creating a soothing backdrop to their quiet companionship. Later, as the afternoon wore on, Finn found himself telling Violet stories about his early days in Glenrio, about meeting Victoria, about the life they'd built together. In turn, she shared tales of her childhood in Missouri, her marriage to James, her hopes for a fresh start in Santa Fe. "My cousin runs a dress shop there," she explained. "She's offered me a position. I have a good eye for color and design, or so she tells me." "You'd be leaving farm life behind for good then?" Finn asked. Violet nodded. "I think so. Too many memories in Missouri, and St. Louis never felt like home after James died." She hesitated. "Have you ever thought of leaving here, starting fresh somewhere new?" Finn looked around the cabin, seeing it through new eyes: the home he and Victoria had built, the life they had planned, now just an echo of what might have been. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But this land, it's all I have left of her, of us. I'm not ready to let that go." Violet's expression was sympathetic but not pitying. "I understand. Some ties aren't meant to be severed, even when they cause us pain." The day passed in this manner, conversation flowing more easily between them as the rain continued to fall. By evening, when the downpour finally lessened to a gentle drizzle, Finn realized he had spent the entire day indoors, talking with this woman who had been a stranger less than a week ago. More startling was the realization that it had been the first truly peaceful day he'd experienced since Victoria's death. The guilt was still there, the grief still present, but they had been temporarily balanced by something else: connection, understanding, the simple comfort of shared experience. That night, as he settled into his makeshift bed in the barn, Finn found himself thinking not of the past, but of the future. Violet would be leaving in 3 days when the stage came through. The cabin would be empty again, silent. The thought brought an unexpected hollowness to his chest. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean by the previous day's rain. Finn rose early as usual, but instead of immediately heading out to work, he lingered over breakfast, continuing a conversation from the night before about books they had both enjoyed. "I should get to my chores," he said finally, reluctant to end the discussion. "After yesterday's rain, there's plenty to do," Violet nodded, gathering the breakfast dishes. "Of course. I thought I might work in the garden again today if that's all right." "The rain will have made the soil perfect for planting." "Planting. There's seed corn in the storage shed if you want to try a row or two." "I'd like that." Her smile was warm. "I saw some tomato seedlings coming up as well. They could be transplanted to better positions." Something about her enthusiasm for the garden, for creating something that would grow long after she had gone, touched Finn deeply. "Victoria would have appreciated your help," he said. "She always said my gardening skills were limited to digging holes where she pointed." Violet laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "Well, I may need you to dig a few holes today if you have time. I'll see what I can manage." The day passed in a rhythm of shared work. Finn completed his most pressing chores, then returned to help Violet with the garden. They worked side by side, planting, weeding, discussing what might grow best in each section of the plot. Their hands occasionally brushed as they worked the soil, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through Finn's body. By late afternoon, they had transformed the half-neglected garden into neat rows of vegetables and a small section of herbs and flowers. Violet stood back, surveying their work with satisfaction. "It's going to be beautiful when everything comes in," she said. "You'll have fresh produce all summer and into the fall." The simple statement struck Finn with its implications. Violet was planning for a future she wouldn't be part of, caring for a garden she would never see mature. The thought created a peculiar ache in his chest. "You've done more in a few days than I managed in months," he said. "I'm grateful." Violet turned to face him, her cheeks flushed from the day's work, a smudge of dirt across one cheekbone. "I've enjoyed it, being useful again, having purpose." She paused. "Thank you for allowing me to stay, Finn. These days have been healing in a way I didn't expect." Finn found himself wanting to reach out to brush away the smudge of dirt from her face, to touch the warmth of her skin. The impulse startled him, and he took a step back, confused by his own reaction. "I should check on the north fence," he said abruptly. "Won't be back till supper." He left quickly, mounting his horse and riding out across his property without looking back. His mind was a jumble of conflicting emotions, attraction to Violet warring with loyalty to Victoria's memory, hope for the future battling guilt over moving forward. By the time he returned that evening, Finn had come to no clear resolution. He found Violet in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the rabbit from the previous day. "Perfect timing," she said when he entered. "Everything's just ready." They ate together, conversation less free-flowing than the previous day. Finn was distracted, torn between the comfort of Violet's presence and his own internal conflict. If she noticed his preoccupation, she gave no sign, instead telling him about the wild turkey she'd spotted near the creek that afternoon. "Big Tom, strutting about like he owned the place," she said, smiling at the memory. "Reminded me of the mayor back in St. Louis." Finn managed a smile at the comparison. "They're good eating if you can get close enough to shoot one." "Maybe tomorrow I'll try my hand at hunting," Violet suggested. "I'm not a bad shot with a rifle." "You hunt?" Finn couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "My father taught me, said a woman alone should know how to feed herself." Her expression grew wistful. He was right, as it turned out. After he died, that skill kept my mother and me fed through some lean years. Each revelation about Violet added to Finn's growing admiration for her resilience. She had faced loss repeatedly: her hometown, her father, her husband, yet maintained a quiet strength that was deeply compelling. After dinner, they settled by the fire as had become their custom. Violet worked on mending while Finn cleaned his rifle, the domestic scene striking him with its easy familiarity. "Stage comes day after tomorrow," he said, breaking a comfortable silence. Violet's hand stilled momentarily. "Yes. Mr. Randall mentioned he'd take me into town early." "I'll take you," Finn offered. "Save Buck the trip." "Thank you." Violet looked up from her sewing. "I've been thinking, I should pay you something for your hospitality." Finn shook his head firmly. "Not necessary. I insist. When I reach Santa Fe, once I'm established, I'll send money." "You've been kind beyond measure, Finn." "You've more than earned your keep," he countered. "The garden alone is worth whatever board you might owe, plus the cooking, the mending." He hesitated. "The company." A faint blush colored Violet's cheeks at his last words. "I've valued the company as well," she said softly. "More than I can express." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that hadn't been present before. Finn found himself acutely aware of her presence across from him, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, the grace of her hands as they worked. "It's getting late," he said abruptly, setting aside his cleaned rifle. "I should head to the barn." Violet nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across her features. "Of course. Good night, Finn." "Good night, Violet." In the solitude of the barn, Finn paced restlessly, troubled by the feelings stirring within him. It had been just over 5 months since he had laid Victoria to rest. Was it disloyal to feel this pull toward another woman? Was it too soon? Would it always be too soon? The questions plagued him through a largely sleepless night. By dawn, he had reached no answers, only the certainty that Violet's departure would leave a void in his life that had just begun to fill with something other than grief. The next day, Violet's last full day at the cabin, dawned clear and warm. Finn rose early and headed directly to the fields, avoiding the main house until mid-morning when necessity drove him back for water and tools. He found Violet hanging laundry in the yard, the white sheets billowing in the gentle breeze. "I thought I'd wash everything before I leave," she explained when she saw him, "so you'll have clean linens." The simple act of care touched Finn deeply. "Thank you, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She pinned the last sheet to the line. "I've started packing my things as well. I don't want to delay you tomorrow." Finn nodded, fighting an irrational urge to tell her not to pack, not to leave. Instead, he said, "I need to ride to the Peterson place. One of their horses is favoring a leg, might not be back till evening." "I'll keep supper warm," Violet promised. The ride to the neighboring ranch gave Finn time to think, to sort through the tumult of his emotions. In less than a week, Violet had transformed his home and, he had to admit, begun to transform him as well. The fog of grief that had enveloped him for months had thinned, allowing glimpses of a possible future, one that included warmth, companionship, perhaps even joy again. But tomorrow she would leave, continuing on to Santa Fe and the new life she had planned before fate had thrown them together. The thought left a hollow feeling in his chest. By the time Finn returned home, the sun was setting, painting the plains in gold and amber. He found the cabin warmly lit, supper waiting as promised. Violet had prepared a veritable feast: fried chicken, fresh bread, the season's first tender greens from the garden, and an apple pie that filled the small home with its sweet aroma. "You've been busy," Finn said, taking in the spread as he hung his hat by the door. Violet smiled, a touch of nervousness in her expression. "I wanted to thank you properly, for everything." The meal was the most pleasant Finn could remember since Victoria's death. Yet an undercurrent of melancholy ran beneath their conversation, awareness of impending separation coloring every word. They lingered at the table longer than usual, neither eager to end their last evening together. Finally, as the fire burned low, they moved to the sitting area where they had spent so many comfortable hours. Violet took up her mending, but her hands were restless, her attention clearly elsewhere. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After I've gone," Finn considered the question. "What I've been doing, I suppose, working the land, training horses for Buck and the others." "Alone," Violet said softly. "I was alone before you came," Finn pointed out. "And were you happy?" The simple question struck him like a physical blow. "I was, surviving." Violet set aside her sewing, meeting his gaze directly. "Is that enough? Just to survive?" "It's all I knew how to do after Victoria died," Finn admitted. "All I could manage, and now," Finn stared into the dying embers of the fire, searching for words to express the change in him. "Now I remember there might be more. That surviving isn't the same as living." Violet's voice was gentle when she spoke again. "Victoria wouldn't want you to merely survive, Finn. No one who truly loves another would wish that fate on them." "I know." And he did know with sudden clarity. Victoria, with her love of life and laughter, would have been heartbroken to see how he had existed these past months, a shell of himself, going through motions without purpose or joy. "What about you?" he asked, turning the conversation away from himself. "Will you find happiness in Santa Fe, do you think?" Violet's gaze dropped to her hands, now folded in her lap. "I hope so. It's a chance to begin again, at least." "Your cousin, is she expecting you on a particular day?" "No, she knows travel can be unpredictable." "The letter I sent simply said I would arrive by summer." Finn nodded, a wild idea forming in his mind. "So there would be no harm if you were delayed, if you stayed in Glenrio a while longer." Violet looked up, surprise clear in her eyes. "Stayed?" "The garden needs tending," Finn said, the words coming faster now. "And I'm no good at cooking or mending. The place runs better with you here. You could stay, as long as you wanted." Violet's expression softened, a mixture of tenderness and regret. "Finn, I don't think that would be wise." "Why not?" "Because—" She hesitated. "Because I'm beginning to care for you, more than I should given the circumstances, and you're still grieving Victoria." The simple admission sent a surge of emotion through Finn, relief, joy, fear, all mingled together. "I am grieving," he acknowledged. "I may always grieve her in some way, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different." Violet's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Are you certain? Because I couldn't bear to be a replacement, Finn, or a temporary comfort until the grief returns." Finn moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. They were warm, slightly calloused from work, steady despite the emotion of the moment. "You could never be a replacement," he said firmly. "Victoria was. She was sunrise, all brightness and color and sudden beauty. You're like twilight, quieter, deeper, no less beautiful, but in an entirely different way." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not offering forever right now. I'm just asking for time to see what might grow between us." Tears spilled over onto Violet's cheeks. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to hope again, after James." "I know," Finn said. "I'm scared too, but I think it might be worth the risk." For a long moment, Violet simply looked at him, searching his face as if for answers to unspoken questions. Then slowly she nodded. "I'll stay," she said. "For a while, to see." Relief washed through Finn, so powerful it left him momentarily speechless. He brought her hands to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "Thank you." That night, for the first time since Violet's arrival, Finn found peaceful sleep in the barn loft, hope for the future replacing the haunting echoes of the past. The following morning, Finn rode into town alone to send a telegram to Violet's cousin, explaining the change in plans. When he returned, he found Violet in the garden, humming softly as she worked. She looked up at his approach, shielding her eyes against the bright May sunshine. "Telegram sent," he reported. "Your cousin will know not to expect you right away." Violet smiled, a quiet contentment in her expression. "Thank you. I've been thinking about what to plant in the south corner. The soil's good there for squash, I think." "Plant whatever you like," Finn said. "It's your garden too now." The words hung between them, weighted with significance beyond mere vegetables and soil. Violet's eyes softened with understanding. "Our garden," she agreed quietly. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm neither had anticipated but both embraced eagerly. Finn continued his work with the horses and land, while Violet transformed the cabin into a true home once more. Evenings were spent in conversation, sharing stories, slowly building a foundation of understanding and trust. Finn moved back into the cabin, taking the main room while Violet used the bedroom. The arrangement was proper, respectable, though increasingly difficult to maintain as their feelings for one another deepened. By mid-June, the garden was flourishing, green shoots pushing up through the rich soil, early vegetables already providing fresh additions to their meals. The wildflowers Violet had transplanted bloomed in vibrant patches, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds. "Victoria would have loved this," Finn said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "She always said a garden should feed the soul as well as the body." "She was right," Violet agreed. "I feel closer to her, working in the soil she once tended, as if she's somehow guiding my hands." The observation might have seemed strange from anyone else, but Finn understood completely. Over the past weeks, he'd come to believe that perhaps Victoria had somehow led Violet to his door, a final gift to ensure he wouldn't remain alone in his grief. "I visit her grave every Sunday," Finn said. "Would you? Would you like to come with me tomorrow?" Violet looked at him, surprise giving way to deep understanding. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I think she'd want to meet you." The following day they rode together to the small cemetery on the outskirts of Glenrio. Victoria's grave was simple, a wooden cross that would eventually be replaced by a proper stone when Finn could afford it. Her name and dates carved by his own hand. Violet hung back, giving Finn privacy as he knelt beside the grave, speaking softly to his first love, telling her about the changes in his life, the garden's renewal, the slow healing of his heart. When he finally stood and motioned for Violet to join him, her eyes were damp with empathetic tears. "Victoria Hawthorn," Finn said formally. "This is Violet Blackburn. She's been caring for our home and garden. And for me." Violet knelt, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers from their garden at the base of the cross. "I wish I could have known you," she said softly. "But I feel like I do, a little, through Finn and the home you made together." It was a turning point for them both. After that day, the last barriers began to fall. Finn spoke more freely of Victoria, sharing memories without the crushing weight of grief. Violet told him more about James, both the good times and the difficult final years of his illness and drinking. By July, their feelings for one another could no longer be denied or contained. It happened naturally, on a warm evening after a day spent harvesting the first ripe tomatoes from the garden. They sat side by side on the porch steps, watching fireflies begin to dance across the darkening fields. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Finn said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. "After Victoria, I believed that part of me died with her." Violet turned to look at him, her face softened by the fading light. "And now I know better." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "The heart doesn't have limited capacity for love. It expands." Violet leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "James once told me, during one of his lucid periods, that if anything happened to him, he wanted me to find happiness again. I didn't believe it was possible then. And now," Finn echoed her earlier question, "now I know he was right." She smiled, a soft, intimate expression that sent warmth through Finn's entire being. "Life continues. Love continues. In different forms, perhaps, but no less real." Finn leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Violet closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening with shared longing when they finally parted. Finn rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, savoring the moment. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just for now. Stay for good." Violet drew back slightly, searching his face. "Are you certain, Finn? This isn't too soon." Finn shook his head. "I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Violet. Not in place of Victoria, but alongside that love. A different chapter of the same life." Tears welled in Violet's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I wasn't looking for this for you when I started this journey, but now I can't imagine continuing it without you." That night, Finn moved Violet's belongings into the bedroom they would now share. Their union was both passionate and tender, a consummation of feelings that had grown steadily since her arrival. Afterward, lying together in the quiet darkness, Violet traced patterns on Finn's chest. "I should write to my cousin again," she murmured. "Let her know I won't be coming to Santa Fe after all." "Unless you want to," Finn said, his arm tightening around her. "I wouldn't keep you from the future you planned." Violet propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with a smile. "My future is here now, with you." She hesitated. "Though I was thinking perhaps I might still use my sewing skills. Mrs. Peterson mentioned the town needs a good seamstress." Finn smiled, reaching up to touch her cheek. "You could set up a shop in one of the empty buildings on Main Street. Buck mentioned Old Man Miller's place has been vacant since he passed." They talked long into the night, planning their future together, dreams expanding to include both their desires and needs. By morning, the foundation of their shared life was firmly established. They were married in September, a small ceremony in the town church with Buck and Sarah Randall standing as witnesses. The entire community turned out for the celebration afterward, genuinely pleased to see Finn Hawthorn smiling again, to welcome Violet as one of their own. That winter, as the first snows blanketed Glenrio, Finn found himself standing at Victoria's grave once more. He'd come alone this time, needing a private moment with his first love. "I'm happy, Tori," he said softly, brushing snow from the wooden cross. "I think you'd like Violet. She's different from you, quieter, more reserved, but she has the same strength, the same capacity for joy." He paused. "I'll always love you, always. But my heart has room for her too. I hope you understand." A sudden gust of wind swirled snow around him, almost like a caress against his cheek. Perhaps it was fancy, but Finn chose to take it as a blessing. Winter passed without the devastating fever that had claimed Victoria and so many others the previous year. Spring arrived early, bringing with it renewal in more ways than one. By late March, Violet's sewing business was thriving, with orders coming in from as far away as Tucumcari for her finely crafted garments. And on a bright April morning, as the wildflowers began to bloom across the plains, Violet shared news that completed their happiness. "A baby," Finn repeated, stunned joy washing over him as he placed his hand on Violet's still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" "As certain as one can be," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Doc Simmons confirmed it yesterday when I went in for that dizzy spell. We'll welcome our child before the year ends." Finn gathered her in his arms, overcome with emotion. Once he had believed his chance at fatherhood died with Victoria. Now, life had granted him an unexpected second chance at that dream as well. Their son was born on a crisp November day in 1879, a healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's determined chin. They named him James Victor Hawthorn, honoring both the past and the future in one small, perfect being. As Finn held his son for the first time, Violet watching from the bed with tired happiness, he marveled at the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. A tragic winter, a chance encounter, a week that became forever all the pieces that had aligned to create this new family from the ashes of loss. Life continued to unfold for the Hawthorns in ways neither could have predicted. Violet's sewing business expanded to include a proper shop in town, which she operated 3 days a week while a young local girl looked after little James. Finn's reputation as a horse trainer grew, bringing clients from as far as Amarillo seeking his expertise. Their family grew as well. 2 years after James came a daughter, Sarah Victoria, with her mother's gentle temperament and her father's sandy hair. 3 years later, another son joined the family, Thomas Buck, completing their brood. Through all the years that followed the good harvests and the lean ones, the joys and inevitable sorrows, Finn and Violet maintained the deep bond that had formed during those early days in the spring of 1878. Their love wasn't the sudden, intense flame that Finn had shared with Victoria, nor was it the complicated, troubled connection Violet had known with James. Instead, it was steady, resilient, weathering life's storms with the quiet strength they had recognized in each other from the beginning. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the expanded porch of the home, they had built together the original cabin, now part of a much larger, more comfortable house. Finn took Violet's hand, his thumb rubbing over knuckles that had grown somewhat knobbly with age and work. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here instead of going to Santa Fe?" Violet smiled, the fine lines around her eyes deepening. At 46, her dark hair now showed threads of silver, but her blue eyes were as clear and kind as the day Finn had found her sheltering beneath that overhanging rock. "Not for a single moment," she replied. "Santa Fe was just a destination, somewhere to go because I had nowhere else. This," she gestured to the thriving homestead around them, to the fields where their sons were helping bring in the harvest, to the garden where their daughter was gathering vegetables for dinner. "This was always my destination. I just didn't know it until that stagecoach was robbed." Finn chuckled, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "Remind me to thank those outlaws if we ever run across them." "I'm serious, Finn," Violet said, her expression softening. "When I left St. Louis, I was just running away from grief. I had no real hope for the future, just a determination to survive somehow. You gave me more than a home. You helped me find purpose again, joy again." "We helped each other," Finn corrected gently. "I was barely existing when you knocked on my door. You brought spring back to my life, Violet." After the longest winter. She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Their hard-won happiness was reflected in the thriving land around them, in their children's laughter, in the community they had helped build. Finn Hawthorn had lost his wife to winter, but in Violet he had found spring again, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new season, equally beautiful, uniquely precious, and endlessly renewing. Together, they had planted seeds of love in soil enriched by shared understanding of grief and loss, tended that love through seasons of joy and sorrow, and watched it bloom into a life neither could have imagined when fate first brought them together on the wild frontier of West Texas. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky above Glenrio, Finn Hawthorn knew with absolute certainty that some endings were merely preludes to greater beginnings, and that love, like the seasons, could return even after the coldest winter, bringing with it the promise of renewal, growth, and endless possibility.